First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. It's a Monday night, and to have students and people from the community here and fellow colleagues is just, I can't tell you how much this means to me, so thank you for being here. I hope there were more chairs, but what can we do? Anyway, tonight I'm going to talk about this very large theme, and I'm going to do so in such a way as to give you kind of like a history lesson as well as a lesson in literature, kind of like blending both, because you really can't understand literature without understanding the historical and socioeconomic forces that creates it. So the way I always do my work is to look at the lives of the authors, in which what they were living, like what was going on around them. And that's how I'm going to present this presentation. What do we think of when we say a place is a motherland or a fatherland? Germany, for example, is almost always referred to as a fatherland, whereas we have all heard of Mother Russia. In the case of Africa, the continent is most frequently considered female. Tonight's talk will not focus so much on why the great land is deemed feminine, but instead introduce several well-known historical figures and fictional characters that have appeared in both literature and film. Our study will crisscross linguistic and geographic boundaries from the Lusophone or Portuguese-speaking nations of Angola and Mozambique to the French-speaking country of Senegal, with Anglophone Zimbabwe and Ghana in between. It will move through the ages, starting with the early encounters of Europeans and Africans in the 17th century to today's post-colonial world. Several genres will be highlighted, including theater, poetry, and novels. Before we begin, however, one thing must be addressed. On the beautiful flyer that the Humanities Week office made for this program, the word Hellraisers must be put into context. Women everywhere who don't play by the rules have often been called difficult, or better yet, crazy. The female Hellraisers we will meet tonight are those who challenged authority in some way or another and were remembered for it. Because our discussion will be presented in a somewhat chronological fashion, one must become better acquainted with a few periods of African history and the female figures associated with them. Our first heroine, Nzinga, lived in the 1600s when the Portuguese were establishing the slave trade between Africa and the sugarcane fields of Brazil. The next two women, Wewaa and Nehanda, fought the British at the end of the 19th century when colonization was thriving throughout the continent. Mother Africa was an inspirational symbol for those battling Portugal during the colonial wars of the 1960s and 70s. The women featured in the Senegalese film Khala by Sembène Ousmane and the novel So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba reveal a post-colonial society in flux, with traditional polygamous marriages existing alongside career opportunities outside the home. Finally, the mother and daughter in the 1996 book Nzinga, A Letter to My Daughter, bridged the gap between generations in late 20th century Zimbabwe. Long before the continent was divided up like a proverbial cake at the Berlin Conference of 1885, a number of places had already encountered foreign visitors in the form of explorers. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to round the Cape of Good Hope in 1488 on their quest for a water route to the spices of Asia. Initially, Africa wasn't their final destination. It was merely a part of a journey to someplace else. Yet, they soon viewed her as an endless source of labor to work in South America and began to ship millions as chattel. Some of the African kingdoms threatened by the slave trade tried to spare their people by negotiating with the Portuguese. One of them was the Mbundu nation in what is now Angola. King Mbende directed his son Angola to speak with the whites, but Angola died suddenly. Some say by suicide, yet others believe it was at the hands of his ambitious sister, Nzinga. Indeed, Nzinga was bold, described as always wearing bangles on her wrists and carrying a battle axe. She was not intimidated by the Portuguese, and on the day the two groups met to sign a peace agreement, she demanded a chair to sit on, to see eye to eye with the outsiders. When one was not provided, she ordered her servant to get down on his hands and knees so she could sit on him. This is a very famous picture. It's an engraving from the period of Nzinga on the servant, and here is the governor, the Portuguese governor, Sousa de Sousa. With the hope that she could stop the enslavement of her people, Nzinga agreed to a treaty with the Portuguese and even converted to Christianity, taking the name Ana de Sousa in honor of the governor's wife. The Portuguese, however, reneged on the agreement and once again began trafficking with slaves, this time with the help of other African cultural groups. Nzinga declared war and personally led her troops against them. A master strategist, she even sought the help of another competing European power, the Dutch. In the end, the slave trade could not be stopped. Yet Nzinga lived a long life, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81. Today, her likeness is found in statues throughout Angola, and she is honored in numerous pieces of literature, including the 1988 play Ana Zé e os Escravos, or Ana, Zé and the Slaves, by José Mena Abrantes. After the slave trade ended, the European powers were interested in Africa's resources and began to colonize her, first by sending Christian missionaries and then troops. The Africans did not relinquish their homes or faith so easily, especially when they were forced to pay taxes on their own property. Women did not shy away from leading the battles against the whites and those who had colluded with them. In the fight over what is now modern-day Ghana, Ya Santewa, now there's a little spelling error. I have this Wewaa. There's no Wewaa. It's just Ya Santewa. Played a major role in the War of the Golden Stool, also known as the War of Ascentewa. This fight took place when the British tried to take over the territory that they called the Gold Coast, and after exiling King Pembe to Seychelles, decided to further humiliate the Ashanti people by taking away the golden stool, the symbol and unifier of the nation. This was way too much for the Ashanti, and it was Ya Ascentewa who guided her people against the British, forcing them to hide within a fort at Kumasi for several months until the rebellion was put down with reinforcements from abroad. Ya Ascentewa was eventually exiled to Seychelles, where she died in 1921. Yet years later, her remains were brought back for a royal burial, and Ghana became a free nation in 1957. There are books and even a movie about her, but a short poem describes her best. The woman who fights before cannons. You have accomplished great things. You have done well. Another woman who stood up to British imperialism was Nehanda Nyakasikana, a spirit medium and oracle of the Zezuru Shona people, who is said to be able to read the future. Her contribution was to provide the inspiration to fight against the British. She was hanged for ordering the assassination of the British commander Pollard. Decades later, Nehanda was associated with the liberation movement against the white Rhodesians. Indeed, before she was executed, she said, or rather she promised, quote, the Europeans before she was executed, she, quote, promised the Europeans that her bones would rise to lead the second struggle against them, end quote. The 1994 novel Nehanda by Ivan Vera describes the spiritual and physical contribution of Nehanda, also called grandmother. The 5 Portuguese-speaking nations of Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, and São Tomé e Príncipe found inspiration to fight colonialists in the figure of Mother Africa. Political journals and magazines were filled with poems in her honor. Perhaps the most noted poet of the era who included maternal figures in her work was the Mozambican Carolina Noêmia Abrantes de Souza Soares, or simply Noêmia de Souza. Born in Lourenço Marques, today known as Maputo, she began publishing at age 19. Her mixed-race background of Bantu, Goan, Portuguese, and other European ancestors informed her work as de Souza critiqued colonial policies that were racist, such as the assimilado or assimilationist provisions that privileged some groups with better jobs or education benefits over others. In much of de Souza's poetry, there is a diasporic element as she mentions the famous singers of Marian Anderson and Billie Holiday, as well as African women who find themselves in foreign lands, far away from their ancestral and maternal home. That's what she looks like. Her well-known poem, Sangue Negro, Black Blood, alludes to the latter. Ó minha África misteriosa e natural, minha virgem violentada, minha mãe, como eu andava tanto desterrada de ti aliada, distante e egocêntrica por estas ruas de cidade, engravidadas de estrangeiros, minha mãe, perdoa, Black Blood. Oh, my mysterious and natural Africa, my raped virgin, my mother, how I have wandered in exile, alien to you, distant and self-centered, through these city streets impregnated by foreign men. My mother, forgive me. In this poem, the narrator not only writes about the symbolic and literal rape of the African continent, but that of her daughters living in the diaspora. How I have wandered in exile, alien to you, is a reference to Mother Africa's children residing abroad who have become alien or foreign to their heritage, their home, and their family. In this poem, de Souza touches upon the question of miscegenation, as the colonial Portuguese men believed that they were open to mating with native women, yet treated their mixed-race offspring unfairly. Overall, by focusing on the mother figure, de Souza offers a woman's perspective on the invasiveness and brutality of colonialism in Africa. At the end of colonial rule, new images of women began to appear, reflecting the economic and political changes in society. In addition to the traditional homemaker and those involved in polygamous marriages, there were women who had careers. Young girls were in between these two worlds, some encouraged by their aunties and mothers to marry older men for their wealth, or urged to continue their studies and be independent. In his 1975 movie Khala, Sembène Ousmane depicts a multitude of women brought together by a polygamous marriage. When El Hadji decides to take a young third wife, his traditional first wife appears upset, yet resigned to the situation, having already experienced it with his second marriage to a haute couture loving younger woman who tries to steal her rights to sleep with their husband. There's in a polygamous marriage, you have different rights, whether it's weekly or monthly, for different women to sleep with the man. It is in this woman who becomes incensed by the entry of a very young virgin from a very poor family, forced to marry up in society to improve her entire clan's lot. His daughter, a student, is disgusted by her father's choice to marry a girl her own age and gets a slap across the face when she challenges him. On the wedding night, El Hadji encounters an unforeseen problem. Okay. The older man can't believe he has difficulties with his ability to perform, and at first blames his first and second wives. Soon he turns to marabouts, or holy men / medicine men, to help remove what he thinks is a khala, or curse. He spends a fortune, eventually losing his business and his position in the corrupt post-colonial government. In the end, we find out that the women in his life had nothing to do with it. They didn't put a curse on him, but rather it was the poor beggars that he had mistreated by ordering the police to harass them. Polygamy is also the subject of perhaps one of Senegal's most well-known books by a female author. In Mariama Ba's 1980 semi-autobiographical novel, So Long a Letter, the narrator, Ramatoulaye, describes what happens after her husband, who has already taken another wife, dies. She writes a letter to her lifelong friend, Aissatou, who chose to divorce her husband after he married another woman and then left to pursue a career abroad. The letter reveals how women feel when a man has multiple spouses. In the case of Ramatoulaye, hurt and betrayal. It also touches upon the financial situation faced by women should their husband cut them off completely. The mother and daughter in the final novel I will discuss represent an older generation of women that hopes younger people will remember the hard-fought battles by the heroines of the past while pursuing a future of education and family. In Nzinga, A Letter to My Daughter by J. Nozipo Marare, Amai wants her daughter to not forget her roots and all the women who helped free Zimbabwe from the colonial Rhodesians, including her aunt and sister Africa, an American who came to the continent to find her father and ended up finding a surrogate African family everywhere she went. This beautifully written epistolary novel is filled with tender advice on how to conduct one's life and be true to oneself. It also does not focus entirely on being a career woman. Amai tells Nzinga how to find the right husband and father for one's children. Quote, "At the end of the day, you will meet only two men in your life. One will make your hands tremble. The other will make them steady. The first will be your passion of youth, but like the blazing fires of bush, it will die slowly to growing embers, then cool ashes. The second will enter your life quietly, like a thief in the night. He will be like the mighty trees. He will be like the mighty trees in the forest that we do not see before us, yet they are there, strong and tall, in rain and sun. They dig their roots deep and shade us with their leaves. It is the second man that you must marry. He will be a good husband and father to your children." This African mother wants her daughter to have a complete life, not just one of study and work. In conclusion, we have met women who have fought against the slave trade and colonialism, others who have lamented religious practices that have oppressed them, and finally, a younger generation interested in not only improving their lives through marriage, but also through education, while still maintaining a link to their heritage. Thank you.